Perfect. Just waiting for people to get connected and get started in a second. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you everybody for patience. We had a technical problem with the platform and had to switch. So really glad to have everybody here. Welcome to our next virtual coffee chat. Really looking forward to this one because there's been a lot of requests from people asking about pitching and creating storytelling. So very excited to have Colleen joining us today. Before we get going too far, just wanted to let everybody know about our next session. So on the April 21st, Victoria Syme from Harmony Marketing and Mark Stewart from Wondermaker are going to be joining for a conversation talking about installations, basically hands-free activations, things we can do in COVID that can really bring your events together and make them happen in a way that we've been really struggling with over the last year. So some fantastic innovations. Always love hearing from both of them. So looking forward to that. So we'll send out a link following today's session for everyone. And so for today, we're talking about storytelling, and really happy to have connected with Colleen, and she's got a book that's recently coming out, just talking about stories and how to pitch who you are. So I won't take too much of your time. I'll let you introduce yourself, Colleen.
Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen Stewart, president of Perfect Pitch Consulting Group. And I've just published a book, which is exciting. It was sort of my dream to publish a book, and it's on Amazon. It's called The Story Compass. And that's really a tool for businesses to use to figure out what stories they have, what stories they need to tell, and when and where to tell them. So I started doing this years ago when I actually put someone to sleep during a business presentation about 17 years ago, and he snored out loud for about 15 minutes. Until I realized what was going on. And he actually woke up for the polite applause at the end. But that was a sales pitch. My manager had flown out from Toronto to help me out. And I was sort of on stage, being evaluated for my sales skills and my presentation skills. And I pretty much crashed and burned that day, didn't get the business. And I decided, okay, that's never going to happen again. So I started to explore what makes for a great presentation, what makes for a great sales pitch. And I realized that what I had learned in journalism school probably had more to do with it. So today I own a storytelling company, and I help companies figure out what stories they have to tell, how do you tell them, and when do you tell them? And so that can be presentations, conversations, quick sales pitches, conversations with employees, pretty much any scenario. We human beings love a good story. Our natural inclination is to tell stories, and then somehow we turn off that natural inclination at work, but I'm just trying to inject it back into work. So that's my introduction, and this is my first virtual coffee chat, so thanks for coming, and I guess I'm just going to stop talking so that you guys can talk to me.
No, it's great. This is definitely an interactive session. You guys sent tons of questions in advance, so I think we have lots of content. But always interested. If you've got questions, just type them in the chat, and we can pick up questions as we go through. But Colleen, one of the things that we always talk about with people we work with, and I try and incorporate into the activity that working in sponsorship, is people aren't buying the ad in the same way that they're buying radio ad or they're buying TV space or a magazine. They're buying into what the event or activity can help align that brand with. And I always refer to it as equity, and it's the equity that you have to offer, but really it's storytelling. So what are the key elements people need to do to start putting together what their story should look like?
Well, you need to figure out what the ultimate goal is. So the first story that I would encourage a company to start thinking about if they're trying to attract employees, investors, sponsorship partners, anybody like that, is you need a good vision story. And the vision story really contrasts the world that you're operating in today with the world that you're operating in the future, if you get to do all the great things that you're setting out to do with your business. And that is a really important story to tell because it identifies for anybody who would connect with you exactly where you're going and why. And that's ultimately why they want to, kind of grab onto your coattails and go for the ride. If we value the same things, if we believe the same things, if we just are somehow really attracted to that vision of the future, we're gonna do whatever it takes to be a part of it, and that's the kind of passion and energy that you want. I've kind of gotten away from the question maybe a little bit, but does that? I think you need to think about the key elements. Are thinking about where are we going and why, and how does that look different from where we are today. I would say that's the first story to kind of pin down and be able to tell really well.
Yeah, and I think some of the examples we've used in the past is, looking at Tim Hortons, they've got this massive investment when it comes to youth hockey. But really, the story isn't about their affiliation with hockey. It's got all this element of being a Canadian brand and, all that Canadiana piece that they want to tie into, or you get Red Bull and all their investment in extreme sports. And it isn't necessarily about the sport, but it's all about energy and what they provide. And I think some people, when they're looking at, what they have available to sell to a sponsor, they're looking at, okay, I'm going to have your logo on this, and you'll get some T-shirts and some passes. But there's that underlying connection that needs to be created, and I think people struggle trying to find that piece.
Yeah, and I think that part of the problem is that a lot of effort around this, what's our vision, what's our mission, what are our values, often starts with almost like an open corporate jargon thesaurus. let's just pull words and what fits. And I don't like that method, because I think it leads to a flattening out of who we are. We as an organization, you can easily start to sound just like your competitors if you're doing that. Where I like to start are, what are your stories? What are the tales that you tell inside your business of a time when you did a wonderful thing, or what speaks to your passions, and tell those stories. I'll give you an example. I started working with a Calgary brewery, Big Rock Brewery. Maybe some of you have heard of it, years ago. And they were just coming out of a period of sort of dropping the quality of their beer because they wanted to mass produce and actually compete with Molson and Labatt's, which was an unrealistic goal and maybe not a great one. So they brought in a new CEO. And after about 8 months of learning all about the business and really observing, the decision was made by him that we're going back to our craft beer roots. That's where the company started, and that's where we're going to go back, and we're going to lift the quality of our beer. But what he also looked at were a lot of the ad campaigns that they would put out. They had a beer called Gopher Beer, and they had a singing gopher who sang the Caddyshack tune. And he said he actually woke up in the middle of the night with nightmares that his entire office was filled with these singing gophers. So it was stuff like that. They were giving away swag that really didn't speak to a consistent value of the company. But it wasn't until they told this story of, being born out of the barley fields of Alberta as Western Canada's premier craft brewer, going through this period of really losing sight of that and trying to mass produce, but then deciding, no, we're going back no matter how painful, and we're going to reach our true consumer. They realized that a connection with where those consumers love to drink beer, so arts festivals, fringe festivals, music festivals, they realized, oh, we got to stop producing singing gophers and all these silly promotions we're doing. We need to sponsor events where our consumer is just really enjoying arts and culture and really good craft beer. And that sort of became very crystal clear as they worked on their corporate story. So again, I don't know if it's as easy as saying, okay, we're Red Bull, we care about energy, so we're going to have Formula One drivers, or we're going to drop a guy out of the thin atmosphere at the top of the earth. I don't think it's that simple. I think you need to start telling your stories and see what values and beliefs keep rising to the surface, because they will. There will be a consistency there. And then you're going to see what type of connections you need to make in your community.
Yeah, I think you brought up an interesting statement in that when you're talking about having everybody come in and you're talking about mission statements and visions. And I've been through a lot of those exercises, and sometimes it can be death by committee. So
Yeah.
how do you stimulate that storytelling conversation without getting it, sort of bogged into that committee speak?
Well, it's hard, right? And I think I'm not, I think that this is where the value is in having somebody who's not deeply connected with your business sitting in the room, and preferably somebody who has made a living out of writing stories that captivate the average reader. I always say if a 12-year-old can understand your vision statement, then perfect, you've done a good job. But if they can't, then chances are you're not hitting the mark with any of your adult audience members either. So I think there's a lot of value in having somebody come in to call you on your jargon and to force yourself to be more specific, more descriptive, and speak in plain language, speak from the heart, and don't worry about all the leverage and the optimize and the words that we love to put into our regular speak. You're going to get a lot more done just talking as you would at the pub, if we can ever go back to the pub again, at the pub, or over coffee, than you will sounding like you're sitting in a corporate boardroom. So I think the first step would be to start capturing these stories, like as good things happen, become a collector, just jot them down. And then at your next meeting, make a point of sharing those stories, but call each other on your jargon, and get in the habit of doing that. It can be annoying at first, but does it ever enlighten your thinking when you're speaking plainly.
And is it a plural situation? Like, do you have multiple stories that you use in different scenarios, or are you trying to focus to get to one?
Yeah, ideally you have multiples. Now so I talk about this in the Story Compass too, that ideally you would only have, say, 2 vision stories. You'd have one for your internal group that motivates your employees. So, and then you would have one for an external audience. Now, maybe one vision story would do for both. That's great. But that would be the most that you would have for vision stories. And then we have these other categories, knowledge and value stories. Knowledge stories are when things went sideways and you didn't perform so hot. And it's really important to talk about those moments. And so you could have as many knowledge stories as you have mistakes, which means any of us could probably fill, all of our wall space with the stories of our failures and mistakes. And that's a good thing, because we want to take lessons out of those. The value stories are all about the times when you really did achieve a heroic act, whether it's from your things that your employees did, or a product that you developed, or a service that you're offering. These are the moments where you're really cheering because you did achieve a heroic act, and there can be as many of those as you want to. And then also journey stories are important. Like, why are you here? Why is the company here? Not so much why is the company here, but where did the company come from? And I would say that you need a journey story for your business. And then every single one of the senior leadership needs a personal journey story about why they're here. And each of those stories should support the corporate journey story. It's fun building this stuff. Like, when I go into sessions, it's really quite inspiring to see how these stories start to snap together and it becomes this folklore of the organization. People are so excited at the end of the sessions that they can't wait to get out the door. But those are the stories that you need. So yes, multiples, lots.
And Rob jumped in with a question, just sort of, is there a time frame that these should be looking at? Right? You're talking about journey stories, that's where you came from, but the looking forward, Are there different areas where, should it be, this is what we want to do in 6 months, this is what we want to do in 5 years, and how do you modify that?
Yeah, so you need to distinguish between vision and mission. So your mission would be shorter term, but vision, it's ideal if it's not really attainable in the near future, that it's something that you are aspiring to. So if you think Microsoft, when Bill Gates first started Microsoft, his vision statement was a computer on every desk and in every home. And at the time that he came up with that, that was pretty much unfathomable at that time. And it was a very lofty goal that would probably take a few 5, maybe 6 years to meet. Now, and Microsoft recently had to go through that process all over again because, well, there is a computer, maybe 2 or 3 now in every home and on every desk. And so Satya Nadella, the new CEO, worked on a new vision statement when he took over. So it should be something kind of just out of reach that you're aspiring to. So I don't know if I can put a definite timeline on it, but you don't want it to be achievable in 6 months, because then you're going to be redoing your vision every 6 months. Now, COVID sort of blew up a lot of vision statements. And I think a lot of companies now are probably, recovering from the hit and figuring out, okay, now what is our vision? I know personally mine has completely changed in the last year.
In terms of, just getting started and trying to figure out, the elements that you would put into your storytelling, which would be, I'm assuming, will become part of your pitch. What are your suggestions on where people start?
Well, every story has a hero. And I don't mean a superhero that flies down from the sky and saves the day. We're not talking about Wonder Woman or Superman here. We're talking more Frodo Baggins. Every story has a central character that it follows throughout from beginning to end. So for your vision story, that can be your company, or it could be the world that you're operating in. Either one of those would make a really good hero for the vision story, because what happens to the hero is at the beginning of the story, the hero is one way, but by the end of the story, the hero is completely transformed. So again, going back to what I said about vision, our world that we operate in looks like this today, but if we get to do all the great things that we're going to do, it's going to look this way in the future. So first off is deciding who's the hero of your story. And I would really caution you against putting yourself or your own organization as the hero in too many circumstances. Push yourself to put yourself in the shoes of your customer or your investor, or whoever it is you're going to be speaking to. So hero. To move the story along, the hero needs a goal. So the hero is trying to achieve something. And presumably, your product, your service, whatever it is you're offering them, are going to help them meet it. And so you need a goal. But no story is a good story without a bit of conflict. So imagine going into a movie theater and being introduced to a young kid named Luke Skywalker, who's a bit annoying and impatient, a little bit brash, and he wants to get off this stupid planet and be a Jedi. And the next 10 minutes are him in the desert with a lightsaber and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he doesn't do anything wrong with his drills, and 10 minutes later, he's a Jedi. None of us would enjoy that movie. In fact, we barely dug into the popcorn. So we are looking for a bit of conflict. So if your hero has a goal, there's a challenge that stands in their way. And that's the third element that is so important. But here's the thing, in business, what I find is that's the element we don't talk about enough. We sort of gloss over that. We want to get to the end of the story too quickly. Even when we talk about our own products and services, we don't want to talk about the times like Big Rock had to, when we kind of screwed up. And in their case, their reps were terrified to go out the door and tell this story of Big Rock deciding they wanted to produce more and more beer and dropping the quality. They thought, that's horrible. Nobody's going to trust us. Well, exactly the opposite is true. The minute that you're candid about the challenges that you face, and the minute that you can really articulate the challenges that your customers face, you are going to win so much credibility. Like the trust goes way up because you're not acting like everything's perfect all the time. So those are the three. choose a hero for your story, figure out what they're trying to achieve, and then identify really explicitly and specifically what conflict they're grappling with that you're going to be able to help them with.
So your engagement with Big Rock, were you guiding them through that process?
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you get them over the fear of failure?
Well, I mean, it took a visit from the CEO, honestly, into the session because it's really hard. You know, I love, there's a book called Iconoclast. It's by a neuroscientist named Gregory Burns, Berns, if anybody's writing this down. And he explored, what is it about the brains of people like Steve Jobs, Oprah Winfrey? Why do these people accomplish these, amazing things? Are their brains different? And according to his research, they kind of are in a way. They're the same, but they've learned to manage certain factors. And one is fear. And that was a big one in this book. He talks about their ability to manage fear, because we're afraid of looking ridiculous. We're afraid that it just won't work. And we're afraid that our audience is expecting something totally different and we're not going to actually meet their need. But I think I just try to inspire through my own stories. You know, I put someone to sleep. Not too many other people have actually done that. So on any given day, I'm probably the worst presenter in the room because I've already done that. So I just try to inspire them by example. And, you know, with Big Rock, yeah, they were terrified. I think we ran the session March, and Canada Day, we went to their corporate party and I bumped into one of the reps. And in March, she had told me, oh, the biggest liquor store owner in Calgary won't meet with me. It's terrible. Like I need to meet with this guy. And in 6 months, I haven't managed to get a meeting with him. At the Canada Day party, she said, I bumped into his wife. I told her the new Big Rock story. And a week later, I got a phone call from him. And he said, my wife told me I have to meet with you. So it's moments like that where she took a chance. You know, she bumped into his wife. She said she felt nervous the whole time she was telling the story. She wasn't sure how it was going to land. But I think you can take some comfort from the fact that all of the brain research says we love stories. It also says that we make decisions with stories, take action with stories. You've got a lot of like human nature behind you. So it might feel scary, and I know that feeling, but take a chance, do it anyway. I think ultimately that's the only way to get around it. I can't force people to tell stories. I just need to count on them to feel the fear and do it anyway.
And I guess one of the other challenges is, you know, if you're working with an organization that there's so many different people feeding into what that story could be, is how do you own it and make it feel authentic?
Yeah, that's one of the pitfalls of doing this, is that you can have too many cooks in the kitchen. And I've experienced that. I worked with a group down in Minneapolis, and there were 8 people trying to build one story for a board of directors presentation. And it just became very convoluted because everybody was coming at it from different perspectives. And their fear at that point was, well, we're going to leave something out. And that's what was driving the decision making. So the other thing that Gregory Burns writes about in his book, Iconoclast, is that fear is like a drug. You know, hopefully you wouldn't get behind the wheel of a car after drinking 5 beers. Fear is like that. So you shouldn't really be making any decisions and navigating anything if you're operating through under fear. So what I try to do to lessen that fear is get my groups as small as possible. You know, that group of 8, we invited people in who really, they were technically capable and knew their stuff, but they didn't have the veto power. And so we brought too many people into that session. So now I just keep it nice and tight, small. Usually you can come through consensus. And you need a facilitator. You know, you probably need somebody to shut it down and kind of quieten the fear a little bit that we're going to leave something out. With any piece of communication, whether it's a conversation, this interview, a presentation, You know, my first goal when I first opened my mouth shouldn't be to tell you everything I know. It should really be to leave you with a burning desire to know more. And that's what we're after with the stories we craft.
And then, so once you start to develop the story, how do you migrate that into your sales presentation or your pitch?
You can, you know, we work on a larger presentation. Sorry, I got distracted from Jim Perry's. So I've just got a question about the Big Rock brand. Sorry, Brad, I'm going to answer it quickly.
Sure.
No, so Jim Button, I know about his story. So that Jim Perry has asked was my tale told during the years of Jim Button at Big Rock. No, so this was Bob Sartor took over as CEO 2010. And so it was through that period of Bob Sartor's CEO-ship. I know of the Jim Button story, but I don't know him very well. So integrating the story into your pitch, then we have a longer structure that we have to work with, because presumably your pitch might be, you know, 15, 18 minutes to tell your story and then open it up for questions. So these mini stories that we build, we can kind of snap them together into a longer presentation that really is a story in and of itself from the beginning to the end. Because a story is definitely anecdotes, illustrative examples, hypothetical examples, but story is also a structure. It's the way that you're organizing information. And if we can just reorganize the information and get you speaking in plain language, that is storytelling, and you will spark that decision-making desire, that motivation to take action inside the brain of the people you're talking to. So, yeah, I'm not sure. Did I answer the question?
Well, it was just, you know, thinking about, you know, trying to make the story, which can become, you know, sometimes you can have too much information. So how to pare that down into a way that when you're putting it to a sponsor or you're trying to sell something internally, that you're able to make it concise. And I guess, you know, what are some of the pitfalls that can come through that?
Well, I think some of the pitfalls are that you go off on tangents and put too much information. Another pitfall is that, you know, story follows a very specific arc. And we all learned it in grade school, but we do it naturally. You know, if I asked you to tell me a story of something you did on the weekend, you're going to tell me a story. It's going to have that setting, that rising action, and then the outcome and the resolution at the end. But at work, we kind of mix that up. So we don't have this nice arc anymore. Sort of flatten it down and mix it up so that pieces are getting, it's like Lego. You want red, yellow, blue, green. But what we do at work is we bust that apart and we mix all the colors. And we think it's making sense, but we really want red, yellow, blue, and green. So I think one of the things that two pitfalls to be aware of are putting too much information in, going off on too many tangents, and not maintaining a very clear story structure. And then a way to test yourself as to whether or not you are being concise is you should be able to tell the story in 2 minutes or less out loud. And when we do written stories for companies, I say 200 words. That's all it should be, and then we can shorten it even more for other applications. But that could go into a proposal. It could go on the website, depending on what you're doing on the website. So it's just a bit of a guideline.
Yeah, and I think that becomes, you know, the element is there's a story, but it sounds like there's a lot of collateral and supporting material that you can direct people to as they start asking different questions.
Yeah, absolutely. You want that conversation. I had an engineer, really young engineer in one of my courses one time, and we were working on presentations, and it was really freaking him out that we were leaving so much information out of his presentation. There was a lot of data and information in it, but just what would support the story. So he was, you know, a little alarmed at how much was ending up on the cutting room floor. And I said, but you'll get a question, and then you can pull from the cutting room floor. You've still got something to say. And he said, oh, I always thought if I get questions, it's because I didn't do a good job. It was a failure for him. And I said, no, it's exactly the opposite. You know, if they end your presentation after 15, 18 minutes and they just can't wait to jump in and say something, then you have done a good job. You've created that engagement, which is what you want.
And I guess the end goal, you're trying to create an image for people, or are you trying to create an alignment with them, or is it a combination of different pieces?
It just depends on what they want the output to be. So yeah, I mean, I think from the point of creating and crafting your stories, then you can start to figure out, okay, what is the visual identity going to be around that? What is our branding going to look like? I mean, if we're right at startup stage, but even for a specific piece, you can then figure out the visuals. You know, we just worked with a client recently who were responding to a huge RFP opportunity, and they were producing a video as well as a written response to the request for proposals. And so it was sort of a very coordinated effort to craft these stories, get them into written form, and then figure out, okay, so now what is the video going to look like that's going to support and complement what we've just put in written form. And I think it sounds like a lot of work, and it is, but in some ways it's not, because it's harder, I think, just to fill PowerPoint slides or just keep writing, you know, endlessly and not have a clear direction. That in the long run is not going to serve you. It's going to be a lot harder in the long run. So if you put the effort and time in up front, it's going to be so easy. You know, at Big Rock, it did get very easy for them to figure out when they got calls for requests for sponsorship. They knew right away who to say yes to and who to say no to. You know, they just had this crystal clear picture in their head because of the stories that they had crafted and told about their business.
And then, so they were able to do that, but then looking at the places that they were, seeking to put sponsor investment in, how clear did those stories need to be, or did they just assume, okay, this is going to be our market and we're going to go after it, even though they may not necessarily have that story alignment?
You mean the people approaching Big Rock
Yeah.
themselves? Yeah. Well, I think, you'd have to have a pretty darn good pitch to have convinced Bob Sartor and his team to give you money, and he didn't suffer fools gladly. But it was more just, you had to do your research. So if I were going to pitch Big Rock for money, and I've done this, I was a board of directors for Canmore Folk Festival, and I was specifically involved in their sponsorship team. And we decided we were going to try and attract some new sponsors. And so at the time I was living in Canmore, and we had, the name is escaping me, the GPS people. Garmin. Garmin was down the road in Cochrane. And, Garmin, they produce a lot of outdoor sports products. So, fit finders that you would attach to your wrist while you're running or biking, and Garmin's for your bike. And that's huge in Canmore. So I thought, okay, well, there might be a natural fit here with the audience that's coming to the folk festival in Canmore and the Garmin. And so I did research into Garmin and how to look at, like, what is the story they're telling about themselves, and what are they saying about themselves, and then wrote an introduction letter that really wove their story into our story. And it was a bit of effort. It took a bit of time, and it took some attention to my writing, but it got some attention. Now, in the end, COVID happened and we didn't run the Folk Fest, so we had to let go of our sponsorship efforts in there. But I think, yeah, if you're gonna approach a company, do your research, know what their story is, and find alignment with yours. And frankly, if you don't find alignment, maybe they're not the best people to go after.
And I think the alignment piece is interesting, just in how you set that story up, is that there's the festival story, about what they're doing from the festival, but the story you were aligning Garmin with was the story of your audience, and what you could bring to Garmin. So it's something I think people need to look outside of their organization.
Yeah, it's interesting, just the ability to connect dots that don't always look connected, I think is a really good skill to have, and one that can be practiced. And one of the ways that I personally decided to practice it in my business was by taking an improv course in Calgary. So when I was in high school, I joined the improv club because my friends were doing it, and it was fun and got to hang out with them. But as an adult, I decided to join an improv class. And it was interesting. What I realized about it as an adult participant is that it forces you to say yes to things that you normally wouldn't say yes to. It forces you to let go of a lot of control. But one of the most wonderful things it does is it widens your perspective. It opens your eyes to new connections. Now, should everybody take an improv course? Not necessarily. But I think there are ways that we can challenge the way we think, or get out of our own ruts, as it were. And that is to say yes to something new occasionally at work or outside of work, just to kind of reconnect the synapses in a different way. And yeah, because I think you do have to look outside of the natural fit and just try something new. And who knows, maybe Garmin would have said no to us in the end. That's okay, that's fine. But I think it was a valid connection to make, with the people who would be walking through our doors and the people who would be then going to their website to order their latest gadget for, tracking their kilometers on a trail run. So yeah, I think you need to stretch your thinking. So in whatever way you do that, learn an instrument.
Well, and there's that road element that becomes a challenge. And there was a question from one of the advanced questions is, what do you do when somebody's heard your story before? So how do you tailor that, or how do you modify it?
Yeah, and I think this is where having a tool, again, like the story compass or some other way to categorize your stories, will give you new ideas about how to retell that story. Because maybe your audience has already heard your vision story before, but they might not have heard a few of your value stories. They might not have heard your journey story. Certainly Big Rock's customers at the time that we went in really hadn't heard the journey story. So they didn't understand why Big Rock is becoming a real case study for this conversation, but there's so many points there. Like Big Rock, they didn't really understand why Big Rock was suddenly reinventing itself as a craft brewer, because they had no idea that that's how Big Rock had began. I mean, some of them did because they've been around for a little while, but most pub owners, new restaurant owners had no idea about any of that. So I think there are always different ways to tell your story. So having a tool to help you guide you through that is pretty critical to getting there, to having that grab bag of stories that you can tell to somebody who's talked to you a fair bit.
I think it's that standout piece, because if you start saying that, we bring in everyone, and you don't talk about the niche that you fit into, then it's one of those things where you're going to fail every time, because people want to buy into a specific group or a specific audience. And if you can become the funnel for that, that's going to make you so much more successful.
Yeah, and that's that. And then there's fear around that too, right? Well, if we say the other objection that I get sometimes is, well, if we say that, then this particular group isn't going to like us, and this particular group isn't going to like us. I'll tell, when I started my company in 2012, never took the time to figure out why Perfect Pitch existed. I mean, our goal at that time was just cash as many checks as we can, because we needed to stay afloat and we needed to be working. So we were saying yes to everything. And we had a couple of sessions. I remember standing in front of a room in Banff teaching sales training, and I just didn't I had done this before, but it wasn't anything I was passionate about. It felt very off for me, and I didn't want to feel that way. And so we decided to put a stake in the ground. We decided we're a storytelling company. Well, one of the first meetings that we had after we made that decision, and we redid all of our marketing materials and we started talking about storytelling, we went to, my ex-business partner and I, we went and looked at, went to visit with the CEO of a drilling services company in Calgary. And we were talking to him about storytelling, and he was sort of curious. And then at one point, he just picked up our marketing material and flung it back across the table and said, stories might be great for, you know, beer or fancy sales departments, but it doesn't fit with oil and gas. And that was the end of the meeting. So, I mean, that was, you know, we walked out of there and I thought, wow, like that's the danger. If we go out there and say we're storytellers, a lot of these engineering technical professions are not going to like us. But in the end, a lot of them did, because they valued what we valued. They believed what we believe. And there's no way that they would have known that if we hadn't been very specific and explicit about what we believe. So yeah, we're probably, you know, not going to work with that particular company. That's okay. There are a lot of companies that I'm working with now over and over and over again who just are passionate about the same things I'm passionate about. And boy, does it make my work life a lot more enjoyable too.
That's a big decision to make, because I think that you know, fear of I'm gonna lose this business or not get this business, versus if we get into a bad relationship that is just going to be so much more work. You know, trying to make that decision up front is a challenge to take a stand on. And it's, you know, it's interesting that the story piece, I think, creates that alignment ahead of time, so that if somebody doesn't fit your narrative, then that's usually a pretty clear sign that it's not going to work out.
Yeah, yeah, because you can waste so much time and energy trying to fit that square peg in the round hole, and it's just not going to go. I've been there. I've worked on jobs like that. I don't think it's fun for anybody, and you end up with a product that that nobody is truly excited about, because again, you know, Brad, you mentioned earlier about having so many people involved in the process. You know, the same thing can happen with somebody you're not aligned with. You end up compromising so much that you don't end up with a product that you're excited to hand the client and the client is excited to have. So yeah, you're almost stealing your own magic in a way by not telling that story.
So how do you incorporate the story into, you know, into your deck, into the imagery or video that you're creating? How tightly knit is that that process?
Well, it takes a lot of editing. I guess when you have the story down, for me anyway, I think visually, and so I'm always coming up with visuals that will complement that story. And then I have a wonderful graphic design team who do the same thing. So we collaborate very closely on the story. And one of my designers, Alan, who I design a lot of presentations with, like, it's almost like we're speaking the same language. Like, he just gets the visual right away. But you have to start with the story. Don't start with the visuals. You know, it has to start with the story, and then everything else becomes that much easier to do. So I don't know if there's like a specific way that like one method that I can say always works, but I would say that if you always start with the story and then figure out the visuals, then you're probably going to be better off in the end and spend a lot less time, maybe even money, on those visuals. You know, people pour thousands of dollars into videos that, you know, maybe tell their story, maybe don't. We spent, when I first started Perfect Pitch, we spent $10,000 on these flyers. And I'll have those flyers till the day I die, I'm convinced, because they don't, they sort of do it, but they don't do it well enough. And we should have started with the story.
Yeah, there was a great episode of Terry O'Reilly's Under the Influence talking about pitches. and these people who crafted these ultimate pitches and going in pitching movies. And these two guys would landed, in LA from the UK, had this great meeting. They opened up, and right away they got shot down. And the guy said, "What else do you have?" So the guys excused themselves to go to the bathroom, come back 30 seconds later with this crazy idea they pitched, and it was for twins. And it was, hey, we've got a movie, but these two guys, twins, one's Arnold Schwarzenegger, one's Danny DeVito. And that was all they had for the pitch. But it was successful because they created that imagery. But it just, I think, is a challenge to find the way to get to that vision. And if they'd come with the picture, I don't know if it would have been the same.
It wouldn't. So that is a really good point that you're making about the picture, because, we have this incredible ability to imagine. Looking at a tree is exactly the same as imagining a tree to your brain. You're using perception centers to do it, to do both. And so if we can leave a lot to the imagination, we're actually doing ourselves a favor, because the audience, when we imagine something, we hang on to it. I'm sure you can all relate to reading a book, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, whatever it is. And then you go to the movie and they better get the casting down, because you've already decided what those characters look like, right? And so that kind of ownership of the imagery can happen really quickly in imagination. So it's not always a good idea to show picture after picture after picture to an audience, say in a presentation or even on some of your marketing pieces. Keep it minimal. One of the questions, I don't know if you're seeing that, Brad, is about pitching over email. And I think you got to be short and sweet and to the point. And if you have crafted a really good vision story of why your organization exists and how you're hoping to change the world, you can probably pull one sentence out of that, put it in the subject line, and get it right at the top of the email. It needs to be brief. I always say to my clients, no bullet points on the slides during a presentation. However, in email, bullet points are your friends. You want to bullet as much as you can. Keep it easy to read. And don't give them all the information. Then invite them to reach out to you if they're interested. If they're not, okay. But chances are, if you create something a little fun and to the point, then you're probably going to get some response.
And I guess it's one of those challenges. There's a passion element when you're dealing with somebody in person, and then move it to Zoom or move it to email, which it just becomes one further step removed. So what are the challenges around about just creating that passion piece?
Well, I think like you and I are having this conversation right now, and honestly, if I won't speak for you, but for me, it feels like a conversation. Feels like a pretty natural conversation. We're making eye contact. It's not the same as being in the room, but I think virtual offers some really interesting opportunities to create a bit of an intimate connection very quickly. So it used to be, that I personally anyway would show up to a sales call, with my feet stuffed into high heels, looking perfectly put together. And I would meet in this very sort of standard corporate boardroom with my prospective client who had also, shoved feet into uncomfortable shoes and was perfectly put together. Great. So we're meeting and we're connecting. But now over Zoom, we're in each other's homes. We're getting a glimpse into each other's personal space. And I think in the last year, we've kind of gotten used to that. And so we might, clean up a little bit. I have, this looks very different than, over there. But this is my home. Like this is where I live. And at any moment, my cat could walk across my desk. And so that creates those moments of connection where if you're open to it, it can be a lot more personal. You can even more quickly get to know each other because we're not in those, starch boardrooms anymore. We're literally in each other's homes. I was teaching a course in November and we had a 15-minute break and it was on Zoom. We had 15 people in the course. And so at the end of the 15-minute break, one of my participants ran in and landed in his chair and, leaned into the computer and said, "Oh, I just shoveled the driveway." And I mean, that would have never happened in a hotel meeting room ever in a million years. And you just kind of get to know each other and everybody had a laugh. So I think there is a lot of opportunity for connection in a virtual world. We just have to be open to it. And yeah, I think that's it. Just be open to it.
I think one of those elements, is storytelling is so old, but are there things that are trends in storytelling and different ways you tell stories that have morphed, or is it still that core element of who humans are?
Yeah, I don't think, it's interesting because somebody said to me in a session one time, we're going to evolve past storytelling. He was a very technical guy, and he believed that storytelling was very primitive and that we were somehow as a human species going to evolve past that. And stories are the unique product of human communication. We are the only animal on the planet who can tell a story, and a computer can't spit out a story the way that a human being can tell a story, with our body language, with the way, our tone of voice, with our ability to fire up the imagination and create this emotional engagement. That can't be replicated by anything else on earth. And so, and it really does happen in our prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function of our brain. So it is a higher level form of communication. I don't know if there are any trends. I think story itself has become a bit of a trend. And in a way, that's a bad thing, because I think there are a lot of peddlers of story out there who maybe don't totally understand the deep structure and the mechanics of it and all of the science around it. So, be careful who you hire too, because story has become such a buzzword that now it's being tagged on to a lot of different corporate learning and development programs. And I just want to make sure that when people are going into those story sessions, that they are with a storyteller, somebody who really understands story in a deep way. Because yeah, we've been doing this since cave days. We needed to remember things to keep ourselves alive. And that's why stories are so important. Our brain believes they're important because our brain attaches storytelling to survival. If you've read the book Sapiens, there's a really good chapter in there about storytelling. And he basically posits that the reason Homo sapiens advanced to the point where they could survive in this naturally chaotic and cruel world was because of their ability to share in storytelling. So all of our systems of government, our businesses, that's really based on a shared belief of a story. What's a business? It's a story, because if you take, he builds out this example that if you take all the stuff away, you still have a business. Why? And it's because of our ability to tell stories. We form communities, we survive. They're very important, and they are at a pretty high function already.
So kind of wrapping up, I'm going to put you on the spot just based on your company name. What's the perfect pitch?
I believe the perfect pitch is true human communication, where maybe you screw up a word, or maybe you look in the wrong direction occasionally, but you can laugh at yourself and just relax into your story. I don't think it means that there are no mistakes. That is not my philosophy. My philosophy of a perfect pitch is when a true human connection happens that brings two human beings together and they want to move forward into the future together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Colleen. It's been fantastic to have you join us, and lots to take in, and trying to figure out how we evolve as a company, our story, and how we work with the partners to assist them. And I'm assuming you're okay that I'm going to share your contact information in the follow-up email with everyone. So
yeah.
If you've got questions for Colleen or myself, you'll have the coordinates to get a hold of us. And let me let you pitch your book again.
Oh, yeah.
That's available.
So, well, this was quite the project. I wrote the story compass, finished the manuscript just as COVID was starting. My business partnership fell apart at the beginning of COVID. I offered to buy the business from her and she accepted. So we went our separate ways and it was good. And then I had to, embrace this virtual environment. So, and in the meantime, I'm publishing a book that is all about companies embracing change, being adaptable, and doing it through storytelling. So the Story Compass is really near and dear to my heart because I feel like I've really lived it over the last year. It's available on Amazon.ca or .com. It's The Story Compass, Colleen Stewart, and you'll find it. So.
Great. Well, happy to offer that plug for you. And for everyone in there, we have recorded the session, and so we'll be making that available for everyone afterward to pick up on some additional tips that you may have missed through it. And then we'll also be sending information out about the April 21st session with Victoria Syme from Harmony Marketing and Mark Stewart from Wondermaker. It should be a great session just talking about hands-free activations. And again, thank you, Colleen. It's been fabulous. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. Look forward to having you again next time.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Enjoy the day.